So we are going to talk about some PCM strategies and how those strategies are used within our programs. So the first thing I want to talk about really quick is the new cycle of crisis that PCMA has included in the new PCM 22 manual. Within the cycle of crisis, we have stable functioning at the beginning and at the end of the episode. And then pre-crisis is divided into 3 different levels, and that's described in more detail in the new manual. We have crisis at the top, and then the post-crisis is also broken down into 2 levels. And they have reintegration strategies associated with those 2 levels of post-crisis, and then also de-escalation strategies associated with each level of pre-crisis throughout the cycle of crisis.
So while this crisis cycle presented in this slide looks a little bit different, we thought it was really important to highlight that in the crisis cycle, there's a parallel process that's happening. So this is based on the work of Dr. Bruce Perry, who is a lead trauma expert in the field and a psychiatrist. And what Dr. Perry is really highlighting here is that when we as staff enter situations in calm and we are able to manage our own regulation and affect, that even though a child might be entering in a different stage and place because we don't always know what happens before school or before the moment we enter a space when a child is in crisis, they're more likely to come back down to a place of calm quicker and more effectively than if we ourselves are losing our cool, which all of you know. But I really think that this is a nice highlight and reminder for us that as long as we are able to be regulated emotionally, that the reactive child is going to follow our lead in those moments because they're borrowing our executive functioning and regulation skills. In moments of crisis, when we are also spiraling in the crisis cycle, which is totally normal, because we are all human. It is imperative, though, that we step out because when we have a reactive child, we have an overwhelmed staff. And what happens is if we are not able to keep our executive functioning and regulation skills present, then when we end kind of that process or that crisis cycle, we end with really problematic outcomes. Because what happens is the child is left in a state of terror and the staff has that parallel process of trauma. And in this example here on the bottom right, it shows us leaving maybe in a state of aroused alert or alarm, but in some of our sites, we've actually seen where staff leave in that same state of terror. So in order to mitigate that, it's imperative that we are really thoughtful and intentional about how we are supporting ourselves and one another during that crisis cycle process.
All right. So as we think about the crisis cycle and the strategies that are associated with each level on that crisis cycle, the first thing that PCMA has in the manual are prevention strategies. And as you all know, PCM really emphasizes prevention strategies so that the event of crisis behaviors is minimized and more intrusive procedures are then not needed. So with prevention strategies, the first piece that we'll talk about is individual information. The manual had some great additions to personal information that would be helpful for staff to gather as they're getting to know and working with new students. The first one is personal information. So age, gender or preferred gender, including name and pronouns, family background, and just some general information about where the student's from, what grade they're in, things like that. And then also some preferences and interests so that we can work on building that relationship with the student. Another piece of information that we'll need to gather is basic needs. What are their eating habits like? What are their sleeping habits like? Is there anything that we need to provide once they get to school to meet those basic needs? And then the third piece is medical health and medical status. So considering medications, whether they're able to take their medications on a regular basis, or if there are any side effects associated with those medications. And this information can be gathered through intake meetings, IEP and eval meetings, reviewing pertinent documentation, and talking with and checking in with the student and their family. All right. So the second piece that PCMA talks about is the environment and expectations. So within our programs, the environment includes MTSS Tier 1 supports, and then also how our buildings are designed, the classroom setup, furniture choices. All of those pieces kind of come together to really enhance the environment and create a supportive environment for our students. Expectations. We have a PBIS and level system expectations in our programs, which would be great information to share with staff as you do that initial PCM training. There are rules and rules with consequences. This kind of shows up in our programs as predictable responses. So very consistent ways that staff are responding in the event that problem behavior occurs. We also have schedules and routines. Some programs have a set schedule with activities and then routines, within each activity in the classroom. Some programs use presentations to teach and review rituals and routines with students as they come into programs or throughout. And then additionally, other environment and expectation prevention strategies include visuals and supports. So maybe SEL posters or having a tool of the week, having the core board available for students to communicate. And then having individualized materials as needed, like a duration map, self-monitoring sheets, timers, etc. And then additionally having communication supports present and accessible, like a student's communication device, so that they're ready and able to communicate any needs that they have throughout the day. All right. Another component of prevention strategies is the reinforcement systems. And I know that you all are well aware of the different reinforcement systems that we have in our programs. In order to provide kind of a whole picture to staff in these new trainings, I did put in a couple pieces of information about our planned reinforcement systems. So we do have a ticket system in the elementary programs, raffle tickets in a school store, and then point sheet and level system in some elementary classrooms. And then RISE tickets in our secondary programs, which then they can use to shop at the school store or attend and participate in different RISE events that happen throughout the year. We also provide student instruction and staff training in these systems so that they know, what they're getting the reinforcement for, how they can earn it, and then maintaining staff consistency and fidelity within those systems. All right, and then the final piece of prevention strategies are our interactions, which is so important in establishing positive relationships with our students. We train staff in TCIT in some of our programs. That's teacher-child interaction training. And then we also have PBIS in all of our programs as well. And so those will be some key pieces to highlight as you're doing that new hire training with staff for PCM. We provide students with specific praise. We tell them when they've done well and what they did. That was really great. We phrase expectations in the positive, focusing on what we want to see rather than the behaviors that we don't want to see. We build and maintain relationships with our students. We get to know them in their own unique ways, that they're comfortable with, kind of following their lead, and then getting to know them and working on just maintaining those relationships. I like to tell staff in my new trainings that one of the ways that I like to focus on building relationships is creating that association between, when that adult is around, good things happen. Another interaction strategy that we can use in prevention is swapping or tagging out staff. And then also taking breaks as needed and recognizing when you need a break and communicating that with your team. And that's a really important piece to emphasize, especially as new staff are coming in and being trained in these PCM strategies. All right, so now we will move into de-escalation strategies. So as far as the PCM cycle of crisis goes, pre-crisis starts at level 1. And so we would use these specific de-escalation strategies with students. We could use prompts to redirect, maybe change the task or activity, changing reinforcement, changing in-task prompting, so maybe the way that we're delivering the task or the way we're breaking the task down. Using pivot praise, which is another piece that's really highlighted within that PCM training. Removing distractions, so maybe offering a breakout space, refocusing the individual on goals and reinforcers instead of the tasks, so talking about what the student is working toward. Using proximity, so maybe increasing your proximity to a student or decreasing your proximity based on their kind of personal space preferences, and then also using behavioral momentum. And in that, we talk about providing some prompts that maybe they're likely to engage in and comply with, and then kind of building that momentum before reintroducing the task or introducing something that's more difficult. Some of these strategies might be included in the students' individual PBIPs to prevent crisis behavior. Ultimately, it's going to be really important that whatever strategies are selected for students, that they are followed consistently within the student's plan.
So when we're continuing on to those level 2 de-escalation strategies, this weighting and reinforcing movement back to pre-crisis level 1 is really reflecting on what were those behaviors that our students were engaging in pre-crisis. And as we're identifying those behaviors, ensuring that we are incrementally increasing our reinforcement strategies so that our students and scholars are aware that they are returning to that calm and that we are eliciting from them the behavior we want to see. So, for example, if Shanae's pre-crisis behavior was sitting in her chair and doodling, and while we were calming down in a breakout space, I saw her start to maybe request some paper and some crayons, I would immediately reinforce that. And whatever her preferred reinforcement was. So for Shanae, it's probably more that quiet reinforcement. So I might, just gently say, nicely done. Or even maybe for Shanae, it's relational. So I might ask her if I can color with her. So looking for those opportunities to reconnect and again, reinforcing the de-escalation. Responding non-reactively and pivoting. This is an important one to highlight in your training because this connects back to some of the trauma training we provide in that full day onboarding as well. We talk a lot about how our affect is interfered during crisis and how it's really important for us to remain calm. It's also important for us to flatten our affect. So what happens is when kids are in crisis, they are not able to accurately identify the emotions of adults and responses when they have a trauma history because they're in that terror response. So they are interpreting all of our responses in a way that makes us seem terrifying. So it's really important that we flatten our affect and we continue that through the de-escalation. Because if we move too fast, what's going to happen, and as you all know, is we're going to move right back into that crisis stage. I appreciate that they mention it's like a crisis continuum that they present, and I've seen cycles where it's circular. But I think the important thing to reinforce to your trainees is that at any point we can re-escalate into crisis, and it can happen very quickly at any point in de-escalation. Reducing demands. That goes back to those physical demands that we're requesting students to do as far as school tasks, activities, also their processing demands. So when we are still working towards de-escalation, we're not using a ton of words. Visuals are super supportive during this time because our executive functioning is not back online when we've just been through a crisis. And when we have a trauma history, moving into that terror stage of crisis that was highlighted in Dr. Bruce Perry's work actually exhausts our system to the point where most people are very fatigued. So being able to process those verbal commands when you're incredibly fatigued is hard. You all know that as, working adults. We're tired, we just can't make those connections. So waiting after providing any sort of verbal cue, and if possible, eliminating verbal cues and providing cues via some sort of written reminder or picture is really supportive. Actively listening and including that reflection in that listening is really important because that's what reestablishes the relationship. At every point in crisis, when we're thinking about a trauma-informed lens, we're thinking about how we are utilizing our relationship, not to prevent a crisis, because that's not always preventable, but to come back to a place where we're repairing. And Shanae is going to offer additional, more overt offerings in that way. But debriefing doesn't work unless we have relationships. So this is our opportunity to reinforce and re-engage our relational aspect with our students. And that active listening is also helping them process what just happened. So when they're saying things like, if Jenna were to say, for example, I feel so bad about what happened, I'm really, really anxious. Jenna, I hear that you've got a lot of guilt around what just happened and you're feeling anxious. Right now, though, our focus is just to calm down. So also offering them some supportive redirecting, but letting them know you're listening. Mirroring and shaping is something that I feel like our behavior analysts do amazingly well, but it's just as their affect becomes more fluid, we are becoming more fluid as well. So we're taking cues from the student, and we're letting them kind of lead that relational reintegration. Offering choices is really important, especially with kids with trauma histories, because when they go through that crisis cycle, it is re-traumatizing at times. And part of trauma is feeling like you don't have any agency. So offering choices is agentic, which ties back to our work for our 4 orientations and in our trauma-informed care. It also is supportive to that relational aspect. Everyone likes choice. Just make sure that when we're modeling this for our new staff, they understand that the choices we offer are choices we're comfortable with. Oftentimes new staff will hear things like offering choices and it will be, oh, so we're gonna do math now, or let's go play in the park. Well, I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I'm always gonna pick play in the park. So how are we giving them context for our new staff during your trainings so that we're shaping for them how to offer choices in a way that's supportive to educational outcomes? Prompting on previously learned coping skills. This is where knowing your tier 1s at your sites and really those nuances comes into play, because those learned coping skills at tier 1 in our SEL happen overtly and covertly. So being in touch with your programs as you're offering trainings so that you can give them really fluid options and what those previously learned coping skills might be at Carner Blue versus Cora versus Bel Air. And maybe having a couple of examples from each site. So as staff are entering their sites, they feel like they have a foundational understanding. And then tangible reinforcers. I don't know about you all, but I love those personally in the form of money. However, that's not allowed for our kids. Sorry, y'all, I think I'm funny. I'm trying to make this positive because this is online. But what are those tangible reinforcers that we can provide? Most of our programs do have some sort of token economy or reinforcement system. So is it the stickers, is it the tickets? And then highlighting that for our staff as you're training and providing them the examples about how that makes them feel, I think helps them continue that education. So all joking aside, when we're presenting to new staff, that tangible reinforcers, for example, for us as adults in the form of paycheck, is really helpful to their connection to this sort of reinforcement strategy, or else some folks can see this as, oh, well, we're bribing them. That is not the case. All of us work for tangible reinforcers. So I think from the get in our training, when we're able to take apart some of those preconceived notions around tangible reinforcers, it's supportive to new staff's training and understanding about why our systems are the way they are. And it supports in our de-escalation strategies.
And unicorn stickers. I will say that as a reinforcer for Kara as well. As we get to crisis level 3, we're really just building on some of the other strategies that we've used in the other levels. We are removing demands. We're removing as much positive attention and as many distractors as possible. So if we've got a crowd building, or if we've got folks that there's a lot of movement happening in the air, we want to really make sure that we're trying to control those pieces so that it's not another thing that's adding to the situation. We want to make sure that we're using proximity effectively. This is a time that we're going to want to change staff. We want to tag out with our staff members, because at this point, we may be at a place where we need to do that. We want to ignore and do nothing. This is a really good time to just be modeling that for the student that we're interacting with at that time. We're ignoring and distracting with known reinforcers. So the coloring, if that's still an option, it may not be at this point. Some of those pieces as reinforcers, making sure that we're ignoring and distracting. And then also preparing the area for a crisis. Getting ready.
So following a crisis, when we are looking to move back into the classroom, this is where we really need to let our students and scholars take the lead. So when we're outlining these strategies for staff during your trainings, I think the important component here is remembering that we're taking cues from kids and we're offering them choices as far as location, and really all of these, but for location, what's stimulating to me might mean something entirely different to someone else. And that really depends on what my sensory needs are, but also like who I am as a person. If I'm an extrovert versus an introvert, most of the time, and you might not believe me when I say this, but my least stimulating location is completely alone. And I prefer that. So, offering them some choices that are in line with what we can actually give at school too, and modeling that for staff so that they feel that they're empowered to be supportive, but without having to make those determinations in ways that the rest of the 916 team can't get behind, because that does happen. Checking for injuries to the individual and staff is an important component for integration. So calling our school nurses to come and be supportive, making sure that staff know to fill out those incident reports and accident reports, because even though, and this happens a lot, they're like, oh, I'm fine. That, bruise or mark in like 3 days might actually be a sprain or a more serious injury. But everyone's adrenaline is amped up following a crisis, even after we're moving through calm. So highlighting that component during your training is going to be really important. Ensuring that the individual's dignity is addressed. So when crisis situations happen in the learning communities in particular, it's really important that before we move a child back into a classroom space, that we're giving them an opportunity just to check in and say like, hey, are you ready? And that kind of goes back to that moving to a less stimulating location too, and following their lead for reintegration. But some students, scholars might not feel ready to be around their peers because they're embarrassed. So giving them time and space to process that is really supportive to ensure their dignity and making sure that that's addressed. And then if there's any additional repair that needs to be done, offering some of those choices with their peers. Like, do you need to have, a reparative interaction, be it a conversation or a circle to repair harm with your peer before you move back into the community? Would that help you feel good? Because it really is about like helping kids feel good about themselves. Ensuring their basic needs are met. As I mentioned earlier, when that adrenaline comes down, folks are tired. They're also typically thirsty because there's been a lot of emotion. Maybe they've been losing liquids via crying. Maybe they've been yelling, their throat's sore. Also, there's a lot of research around if you're eating, you can't have a trauma response, because when you have a trauma response, your other systems shut down in order to prepare your body to fight, flight, freeze. So by offering them a snack, you're also ensuring that they're less likely to go back into that crisis as soon as they re-enter the learning community. And you're meeting their basic needs, which is a relational attachment component that's really lovely for ensuring that trauma-informed support. Confirming behavioral expectations. Okay, so in the manual, it says reasonable beliefs for higher functioning individuals with good verbal skills. So we're not going to take an ableist lens. So I'm inviting you to think about what this looks like in our programs with our learners. We can confirm behavioral expectations and offer reasonable beliefs for kids in a variety of different ways that meets their needs and meets them where they're at. So how are we then using assistive technology? How are we using the support of our interpreters? How are we ensuring that kids are able to connect to language and however they need to so that they're a part of this conversation? Because it really is about co-constructing. So how are we co-constructing their reintegration so that we're all on the same page and offering reasonable accommodations to do that? The last component here too, I also put 3 little asterisks next to you because I was like, So in the PCMA manual, they talk about addressing concerns related to future privileges. Okay, so school's not about compliance. So I just need to name that, and we talk about that in our 4 orientations. And when we're thinking about what it looks like in programs, different programs have different systems that we use to reinforce positive behavior. So this is really getting at, oftentimes after an event, students are concerned about, are they still going to get access to the things they really like to do? And because our focus is on learning new skills, not about punishment, as often as possible, we are going to ensure that they know that what happened, and now we're moving future forward, and they still have opportunities to engage in those fun, important things. However, there are times when there are learning moments based on negative consequences. And in those moments, so Jenna, let's say, had a really big crisis in the learning environment and staff were injured, maybe a peer was injured. So we're going to end her day. Following, even after we do the reintegration slowly, we're calm, we're starting to come back to this place where we understand the behavioral expectations collaboratively. But we're going to let her know in this moment, Jenna, you've done a really beautiful job calming down and coming back to this place where we're able to work together. And we're going to end your day today and we're going to start over tomorrow. And tomorrow when you come in, we're going to then outline what those next steps are so that she knows ahead of time and you have kind of a contract. Even though it's verbal, it's really important for kids to know so they can expect that when they come in. And then we follow through with the plan because that consistency and structure is imperative. $57, Shania. What's happening with your computer? Is it?
We got it. We got it. All right. So post-crisis level 2. So these are the reintegration strategies at the second level as the student is, progressing towards stable functioning in that crisis cycle. The strategies outlined in the manual include managing tasks. So, when we share this information with our new hire trainings, talking about the different routines for returning to class and getting caught up, whether that looks like a sit and watch or just having additional staff assistance to kind of bring them back to whatever activities are going on in the classroom. And then also modifying tasks as needed or modifying activities for students as needed. Managing reinforcement is another strategy for this reintegration at the post-crisis level 2. And here we're just going to be gradually reintroducing those reinforcement systems, continuing with the ticket system and, providing that specific praise throughout their time as they kind of reintegrate into the classroom.
And this is where, as we're increasing interactions with others, we want to make sure we have a really slow return. We really still want to protect the student as they're coming back in because they're probably not feeling that great about themselves because of what they just experienced, what just happened. So we want to make sure that it's slow with safe people, safe students, people that aren't going to make it hard for them as they return back. We also want to collectively discuss ways to repair. So asking, like, what do you need? Do we need to talk? And I think Cara just mentioned it earlier. What do we need to do to get you back in? Do we need to do a restorative activity? Do you need to talk to the other student that was involved? Do you want to talk to the staff? Just offering a chance for them to process before we get ready to go back. So maybe they just need that piece as they return back with others. And then we're going to also want to assess. We want to scan, we want to track, see what's happening in the room. We want to do that to make sure that as we're doing this increase with others, that it's still going okay. And then we want to find something to praise. We've just been through something. We want to make sure that we're giving some positive reinforcement as we are increasing our interaction and moving back with others. This is one of the offerings that, as kind of aligning all of this together, we wanted to make sure that was included. Each site does have a different kind of procedure as far as with debriefing goes. Sometimes it's depending on the site, like what time it happens. Is it the next morning? Is it at the end of the day that everybody meets? But this is just an offering for staff before we move on with all the politics of what we need to respond to by law, offering this debriefing circle. How are you feeling about everything right now? Offering them a chance to kind of just say, okay, I'm okay, or it's not okay, I'm still feeling like this. Asking them an overview, because sometimes in all of the rush and fuss after everything's happened, we don't necessarily ask them specifically what their viewpoint was or what happened with them. And then we want to ask, are there any questions they have for other team members? Maybe Jenna and I were involved in the situation and I was wondering about something that she did. So I want to maybe ask her something as we're debriefing this. And then what could we have done differently? Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes everything goes really well, but just offering an opportunity where as a collective group, we can say, would you have done that different? Or maybe I should have done this piece, or I should have tagged out, or whatever the case is, offering that as a question so that as we're processing, we can get that out if we need to. And also the last question, which I think is one of the most important, is What type of support do you need to move forward? Do I need a minute? Do you need a break? Do you need to talk to somebody? Whatever it is, making sure that we're offering that so that staff knows that we're in support as we are finishing and handling some of these crisis situations, that we want to make sure that they have what they need as we move forward with our day.
So why is debriefing so danged important? Because it is so danged important. It's because there are inherent risk factors in our work. And if we want to ensure that we have staff that are in fact built to last, and if we want to ensure that we have staff that are able to sustain the high level of work we do, but with integrity and with being able to access their brilliance and skills, we need to ensure that they are managing their own trauma response. That inherently happens when we work with students who have histories of trauma. Everyone who works with individuals in our programs is vulnerable to developing something we call STS, or secondary traumatic stress. So what is it? Secondary traumatic stress basically occurs when you are exposed to the trauma of others and you start to develop your own trauma symptoms, reactions, and triggers. And if it goes unchecked, then what happens is it actually can manifest into full-fledged trauma, including diagnoses of PTSD. In order to interrupt that cycle and ensure that that is not the case, debriefing allows us a really intentional opportunity to check in with one another. And when we see our peers struggling, we can then offer them resources and supports. And we do go over this in the full day trauma onboarding, including offering staff now an opportunity to develop their own self-care plan. So I would encourage you during your training, to go through that with them and ask them about that in real time, because they're going to get that in the trauma training as part of their new employee orientation and onboarding. For folks that have been in our sites for a while, I think it's still really important to highlight, how do we take care of one another? Are you aware of the systems we have in place at 916 to ensure that if you do need extra support, that you access it? So thinking about like the employee assistance program, thinking about folks like Kevin Horst or Shania or myself, who are always available to connect with staff and provide them additional support. Jimmy Higgs, who is actually contracted with our district as a debriefer. So staff can meet with him if they want that neutral third party and get some additional resources and supports. But this system doesn't work if it doesn't start with the debrief. So the debrief is a really intentional step for us to ensure that we're taking care of our staff so that we are built to last.
Shania, you're muted.
Of course I am. Of course I am. Okay. So looking at post-crisis level 2 reintegration strategies, as we're talking about debriefing with the student and their family, if we're able to do that, and we've been really fortunate through this pandemic, I like to call it one of the secret little gifts, figuring out how to use our technology to make sure that happens, so that we can do a Google Meet or whatever it needs to be in order for us to have an opportunity to debrief with the student and the family. I think that's really, really important. It always can't happen in person, but we are able to do it via Google should the need be there to do so. But these are the questions that we identified that would be really, really helpful as we are having that conversation with family, acknowledging the awkwardness. Something big happened if we had to go hands-on with their student. And so asking everybody that's involved as a part of this process what they'd like to accomplish in the meeting. And so previously when we've had that happen, I've had parents say, when we got to that point, is there something that I could have done? Would a call to me have helped? So that's where we really start to identify things that we can do in order to support each other as a team to make sure that we're not having these kind of situations occur. The next part is really giving everybody a chance to tell their point of view as they became a part of the situation. That sounds kind of silly, but not everybody gets a chance to know what happened prior to their involvement. Not everybody gets to see what everybody's perspective is. And sometimes this is the first time as a group that everybody's able to talk about that and say what their experience was. And that's huge when you're processing through a critical incident. The next question is, how have I been impacted since the incident? A lot of times people don't say like, oh, I'm still mad or I'm hurt or whatever the case is, but it's an opportunity to do so. And sometimes you will get that, like, I'm concerned how we move forward. I'm sad because that hurt my feelings. And the grownups get to say that too, which is really important for them to see that their relationship with us, we value that and it's important to us. So we're trying to work through that too. The next question is, one thing you would have liked to have been done differently. You're going to get a couple different things with that question. You're going to get some things from staff, you'll get some things from parents, but it's an opportunity to really talk it out and process through this. And then you follow up with those pieces and ask, kind of building on our conversation, what type of support do you need moving forward? How do we make sure that this doesn't happen? How do we take steps together and plan for this so that it doesn't end this way the next time? And that's just another great conversation as we're working as a team to best support the student, because that's ultimately what it's about. And for the closing, we want to make sure that we ask, was there anything that we missed? Because we don't want people to walk away feeling like they didn't get to say their piece, because really we want to move forward after this point. We want to go to whatever it is that's next. And so that is how we would close that piece.
All right, so what are the takeaways of this training and this information that we've shared with you? The first one is that PCMA, the 4 orientations, restorative practices, and trauma-aware care are all aligned. There's a lot of overlap and intersection across all of these different frameworks, and it's important to find those intersections and then be able to make that overt connection as instructors of PCM to help the staff that we are training in this new hire training. The slides that we have prepared for you are for you to use and integrate into your trainings. We just ask that you make a copy and then you can pick and choose, what would work best for you from this information to start incorporating into your training as a PCM instructor. We also invite you to feel free to use the different role play examples that we've provided throughout this training to support you in the PCM training with new hires. And the last piece is, you got this. Regardless of the alphabet soup behind your name, this is our work as 916 educators, and it's important to find areas where these practices do intersect, and then find those commonalities and discuss them with our staff as we welcome them to the 916 community.
So some of you might know this about me, but I like to craft. And one of my pandemic craftings that I have learned is how to quilt. And when I think about how we bring together these concepts, it is this really intentional quilting, stitching together, weaving, if that's more your framework, of practices, because they're all interconnected in order to ensure that positive outcome for our students. This exit ticket is an invitation for you all to sit with this material and really critically think through that process of how to integrate this framework and this weaving into your practice as our PCMA instructors.
And as you go through each of these different components of the question and reflect on each piece, we encourage you to think about what types of actionable steps you'll be able to take and really apply this information to your trainings moving forward.
So the first question that we would like for you to reflect on is, how will these frameworks support your plans for building agentic opportunities for our 916 students during crisis? The second is, how will it inform your critical training practices and discussions? How will it be a tool for reevaluating your training practices? And how will it be a tool for reevaluating your relationship building strategies and techniques?
Thank you all for participating in this training. We really value the work that you do as PCM instructors, and we hope that the information from this training just further supports and bolsters the training and information that you share with new staff as they join our 916 team.